I watched a woman die 17 times in 16 days. Each time, I stood by her bed, stethoscope pressed against her chest, listening to silence. No heartbeat, no breathing, no life. I would note the time, prepare to call it, and then, she would come back. Every single time, until the 17th time, when she didn't. Her name was Margaret Sullivan, and what happened to her in that hospital room changed everything I thought I knew about death. This isn't a story about a miracle. This isn't a story about faith or hope or the power of positive thinking. This is a story about a woman whose body forgot how to die. And the 16 days I spent watching her remember. My name is Dr. Marlowe. I practiced internal medicine for 37 years before I retired. I've signed hundreds of death certificates. I've held the hands of dying patients and their families. I've learned to recognize the signs, the stages, the inevitable progression from life to death. It became routine, clinical, predictable. But Margaret Sullivan wasn't predictable. And what I witnessed in her hospital room still keeps me awake at night, 15 years later. Let me tell you what happened. It was February 2009. Portland, Maine was buried under 2 feet of snow, and St. Catherine's Hospital was running at capacity. I was 61 years old then, still practicing full-time, specializing in palliative care. That's a polite way of saying I help people die comfortably. Margaret Sullivan was admitted on a Monday morning. 73 years old. Terminal pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The cancer had metastasized to her liver, her lungs, her lymph nodes. Her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, had given her weeks at most. More likely days. I was called in for palliative care consultation. My job was straightforward. Manage her pain, keep her comfortable, and help guide her and her family through the dying process. I'd done this hundreds of times. I knew exactly what to expect. When I walked into room 407 that Monday afternoon, I expected to find a dying woman. What I found instead was Margaret Sullivan sitting upright in her hospital bed, reading a gardening magazine, with reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when I entered. Her eyes were clear, bright, even. She smiled at me, a genuine warm smile, and said good morning like we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of in a hospital room where she was supposed to be dying. I introduced myself, explained my role. She nodded politely, set down her magazine, and told me she appreciated my help. Her voice was steady, strong. There was no tremor, no weakness, no breathlessness. I pulled up her chart on the computer terminal in her room. The numbers were catastrophic. Tumor markers through the roof. CA19 to 9 levels over 10,000. Liver enzymes indicating severe hepatic dysfunction. Bilirubin climbing steadily. Her kidney values were starting to climb too. Every single metric screamed end-stage terminal disease. But the woman sitting in front of me looked like she was waiting for a bus, not for death. I asked her about her pain levels. She told me she felt fine. A little tired, maybe. Some discomfort in her abdomen. But nothing severe, nothing she couldn't handle. I performed a physical examination. Her abdomen was distended, firm. I could palpate the masses beneath her skin. Large, hard, immovable. Her liver was grossly enlarged, extending well below her rib cage. I could feel the tumor burden with my hands. Her spleen was enlarged too. Classic signs of advanced metastatic disease. But her vital signs were completely normal. Blood pressure, 120/70. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute, regular rhythm. Oxygen saturation, 98% on room air. Temperature, 98.6. She should have been in multi-organ failure. She should have been unconscious, or delirious, or at minimum in excruciating pain. The disconnect between what her labs showed and what I was seeing was profound. I increased her pain medication anyway. Set up a morphine drip on standby. Called her family in for a meeting. Her daughter Rachel drove up from Boston. Her 2 sons flew in from California and Texas. They gathered in the family consultation room, and I gave them the talk I'd given hundreds of times. I told them their mother had days, not weeks. That her body was shutting down. That we would keep her comfortable, but they needed to prepare themselves. They needed to say their goodbyes. Rachel cried. Her brothers stood there with their jaws clenched, trying not to. They asked me how long. I told them the truth. Based on her labs and her scans, I was surprised she was still conscious. It could happen any time. Tonight, tomorrow, but soon, very soon. That was Monday afternoon. I went home that night expecting to get a call from the hospital before morning. I expected Margaret Sullivan to die in her sleep, peacefully, the way terminal patients often do. But Tuesday morning, Margaret was eating scrambled eggs and watching the Today Show. I stopped by her room during my morning rounds. She was sitting up, breakfast tray across her lap, chatting with her nurse about the weather. She saw me and waved, asked how my night had been. I stood there in the doorway, staring at her chart, then at her, then back at her chart. The labs from that morning were worse. Significantly worse. Her liver function had deteriorated overnight. Her kidney values were climbing. Her potassium was dangerously high. Her sodium dangerously low. These were the kind of electrolyte imbalances that cause seizures, cardiac arrhythmias, death. Margaret asked me if I wanted some of her toast. She said the hospital kitchen made it just right, crispy but not burnt. I checked her vitals myself. Normal. All of them. Normal. I told her I'd check on her later and left the room. Found Patricia Chen in the hallway. Patricia was young, early 30s, brilliant. She'd trained at Johns Hopkins, published research in major journals. She was the kind of doctor who believed in data, in evidence, in measurable reality. I showed her Margaret's labs. Showed her the comparison from admission to now. Showed her the trend lines, all pointing sharply downward toward organ failure and death. Patricia stared at the numbers. Then she pulled up Margaret's CT scan from admission. We looked at it together on the computer screen in the nurse's station. The tumors were massive. The primary pancreatic mass was over 8 centimeters. The liver metastases were too numerous to count, the largest over 5 centimeters. There were multiple lung nodules. Lymph node involvement throughout her abdomen and chest. Patricia zoomed in on the pancreatic mass. It had invaded the superior mesenteric artery. It was wrapped around the celiac axis. These were unresectable tumors. Inoperable. Fatal. She looked at me and said something I'd never heard her say before. She said she didn't understand how Margaret was still alive. I told her I didn't either. We decided to run more tests. Maybe we'd missed something. Maybe the original diagnosis was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation we hadn't considered. We ordered a new CT scan. New blood work. Tumor markers. Metabolic panels. Everything we could think of. The results came back Thursday morning. I was in my office when Patricia came in. She closed the door behind her. Sat down across from my desk without saying anything. Then she opened her laptop and showed me the new CT scan. The tumors had grown. In just 3 days, they'd grown. The pancreatic mass was now over 9 centimeters. The liver metastasis had increased in size and number. There were new nodules in her lungs. The cancer was progressing rapidly. Aggressively. Margaret Sullivan should have been dead, but she was in her room doing a crossword puzzle. Patricia asked me if I believed in miracles. I told her I believed in medicine. In science. In things that could be measured and explained. She nodded. Then she asked me what we do when medicine and science can't explain what we're seeing. I didn't have an answer. That afternoon, I spent 2 hours in Margaret's room. I told her I was monitoring her closely, which was true. But really, I just wanted to watch her. To observe. To try to understand what was happening. We talked. She told me about her life. She'd been a librarian for 40 years at the Portland Public Library. She loved books, loved helping people find the right story at the right time. Her husband Tom had died 5 years earlier, heart attack, sudden. They'd been married for 48 years. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. She showed me pictures on her phone. Told me stories about each of them. She was proud of her family. Content with her life. She'd had a good run, she said. No regrets. I asked her if she was afraid of dying. She said no. She'd made her peace. Said her goodbyes. Really said them. Not the, see you later, kind, but the real kind. She'd gotten her affairs in order. Updated her will. Picked out her coffin. Even pre-written her obituary. She was ready. Completely, genuinely ready to die. But her body wasn't cooperating. Around 6 that evening, I was still sitting in her room. Margaret was telling me about a book she'd read recently when she stopped mid-sentence. Her expression changed. Became distant. She said she felt strange. Tired, suddenly. Very tired. I stood up, moved closer to her bed. Her breathing had changed. Slower. Shallower. Her eyes started to close. I checked her pulse. It was weakening. Becoming irregular. I looked at the cardiac monitor. Her heart rate was dropping. 60 beats per minute, 50, 40. Her blood pressure was falling. 90/60, 80/50, 70/40. This was it. This was the process I knew. The cascade of organ failure. The body finally giving up. Death arriving exactly as it should have arrived days ago. I pressed the call button for the nurse. Linda came in, saw what was happening, and quietly stood by the door. We both knew there was no point in calling a code. This was expected. This was what Margaret had been admitted for. Margaret's breathing became more labored. Then it stopped altogether. Her heart rate dropped to 0. The monitor flatlined with that long, sustained tone we all recognize. I looked at the clock. Noted the time. 6:14 p.m. Pulled out my penlight to check her pupils. They were fixed and dilated. No response. I put my stethoscope on her chest. Listened for 30 seconds. No heartbeat. No breath sounds. Nothing. I looked at Linda. Started to say the words. Started to call the time of death. And Margaret Sullivan took a breath. Not a gasp. Not a desperate, choking gulp of air. Just a normal breath. Like she'd been holding her breath and decided to let it out. Her eyes opened. She looked at me. Looked at Linda. Looked confused. She asked if she'd fallen asleep. Said she was sorry if she'd worried us. The cardiac monitor showed a normal rhythm. 72 beats per minute. Her blood pressure was back to 120/70. Her oxygen saturation was 98%. Linda and I just stood there, staring at her. Staring at the monitors. Staring at each other. Margaret adjusted her pillows and picked up her book like nothing had happened. I went back to my office. Sat at my desk in the dark. Tried to process what I'd just seen. Tried to fit it into any medical framework I knew. I couldn't. I called Patricia. Told her what happened. She was silent for a long time. Then she said she'd come in early tomorrow. We'd figure this out. But we didn't figure it out. Because it happened again. Friday morning, Margaret coded twice. Both times, complete cardiac arrest. Both times, she came back on her own. No intervention. No CPR. No medications. She would just stop, stay stopped for several minutes, and then start again. By Friday afternoon, word had spread through the hospital. Nurses were avoiding room 407. Other doctors started coming by, making excuses to check on her, wanting to see for themselves. We moved her to the ICU. Attached every monitor we had. Continuous EEG to monitor brain activity. Arterial line for precise blood pressure monitoring. Central line for medications we thought we might need but never did. And we watched. Saturday, she died 4 times. Sunday, 3 times. Each episode followed the same pattern. She would become suddenly fatigued. Her vitals would crash. Complete cardiac and respiratory arrest. No brain activity on the EEG. Clinical death by every measure we had. And then, after anywhere from 3 to 12 minutes, she would come back. Heart would start beating. Breathing would resume. Brain activity would return. She'd open her eyes, apologize for worrying everyone, and ask if she'd missed lunch. The medical team was in chaos. We contacted researchers at Harvard Medical School, at Johns Hopkins, at the Mayo Clinic. We sent them Margaret's data, her scans, her labs, videos of her episodes. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Nobody could explain it. Some of the staff started refusing to go into her room. Nurses would draw straws to see who had to check her vitals. Even Patricia, who prided herself on rational thinking, started taking the stairs instead of the elevator that passed by the ICU. But I kept going back. Kept watching. Kept documenting every episode. Because I needed to understand. This was my job. This was what I did. I helped people die. But Margaret wasn't dying. She was caught somewhere between life and death, unable to fully commit to either. On day 8, I noticed something. I was reviewing the logs of her episodes, the exact times, the durations. And I saw a pattern. The episodes were getting longer. Not the time she spent dead, that varied. But the time between episodes. The first day, she had 4 episodes. The second day, 3. By day 8, she was down to 1 or 2 per day. It was like her body was learning. Adapting. Finding some new equilibrium. Or maybe, I thought, it was like her body was preparing for something. That night, I stayed late in the hospital. Sat in the ICU break room, going through Margaret's file for the 100th time. Around midnight, Linda found me there. Linda had been a nurse for 23 years. She'd worked in emergency rooms, trauma units, ICUs. She'd seen everything. Nothing rattled her. But when she sat down across from me that night, her hands were shaking. She told me something had happened during the previous night shift that she hadn't reported. She said she almost didn't tell me. She thought I'd think she was losing her mind. I told her to tell me anyway. She said that 2 nights ago, around 3 a.m., she'd gone into Margaret's room for a routine check. Margaret was asleep. Linda took her vitals, checked the monitors, recorded everything. And then she noticed the cardiac monitor had flatlined. But Margaret was still breathing. Slow, steady breaths, her chest rising and falling. Her color normal. Linda checked the LEDs, reconnected them, adjusted them. The monitor stayed flat. No electrical activity. No heartbeat. She put her stethoscope on Margaret's chest and listened. Nothing. No heartbeat. No pulse. But Margaret kept breathing. Linda said she stood there for almost 90 seconds, stethoscope pressed against Margaret's chest, hearing absolute silence. No heartbeat, but steady breathing. Then suddenly, the monitor beeped. One beat, then another, then a normal rhythm. Linda listened again. Normal heartbeat, normal everything, like nothing had happened. I asked Linda why she hadn't reported this. She said because it didn't make sense. The body can't breathe without a heartbeat. The brain needs oxygenated blood. You can't have respiratory function without cardiac function. It was impossible. But she'd seen it, heard it, or rather, heard the absence of it. I thanked her for telling me. Told her to document anything else unusual, no matter how impossible it seemed. On day 10, Margaret's daughter Rachel came to my office. She looked exhausted. She'd been staying at a hotel near the hospital, spending 12 hours a day with her mother. Watching her die and come back. Die and come back. Rachel asked me a question I'd been asking myself. She asked me if her mother was suffering. I thought about it carefully. Thought about every episode I'd witnessed. Margaret never showed signs of distress. No panic. No struggle. Even during the episodes themselves, there was no agitation. She would simply slip away peacefully, and then slip back just as peacefully. I told Rachel the truth. I didn't think Margaret was suffering. Physically, she seemed comfortable. Mentally, she seemed at peace with what was happening. Or as much at peace as anyone could be with something like this. Rachel nodded, stared at her hands. Then she asked me something that hit harder than any medical question could have. She asked me if I thought her mother wanted to die but couldn't. I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. But the question stayed with me. Followed me home. Kept me awake that night. The next morning, day 11, I went to Margaret's room early. Before rounds. Before the hospital really woke up. I found her sitting in the chair by the window, looking out at the parking lot below. The sun was just coming up, painting the snow-covered lot in shades of pink and gold. I asked her if we could talk. Really talk. Not as doctor and patient. Just as two people trying to make sense of something impossible. She smiled and gestured to the empty chair next to her. I sat down. For a while, we just looked out the window together. Watched the early shift nurses arriving. Watched the snow falling lightly. Then I asked her what it felt like. The episodes. The dying and coming back. Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. Thoughtful. She said every time she felt herself slipping away, there was this moment of complete peace. Like falling asleep after the longest, hardest day of your life. A sense of finally being able to rest. To let go of everything. She said she wanted to stay in that moment. To sink into it. To let it carry her wherever it was taking her. But then something would pull her back. Not something external. Not a voice or a light or anything dramatic. Just this sense, deep in her bones, that it wasn't time yet. That she couldn't go yet. I asked her why. Why wasn't it time? She said she didn't know. She'd said her real goodbyes. Made peace with her life. Settled all her affairs. There was nothing left undone. Nothing keeping her here. No unfinished business. But her body kept bringing her back anyway. I asked her if she was afraid. Afraid of dying, or afraid of what might come after. She shook her head. Said she wasn't afraid of either. She was just confused. She was ready. She wanted to go. But something wasn't letting her. We sat there as the sun came up fully, painting her face in warm light. She looked so tired, so worn down, not by pain or sickness, but by this strange limbo she was trapped in. I went back to my office and spent the entire day going through every piece of data we had on Margaret. Every lab result, Every scan, every vital sign from every episode. And that's when I saw it clearly. The pattern I'd noticed before became unmistakable. The episodes weren't random. They were following a progression. The frequency was decreasing, yes. But more than that, they were changing in character. The early episodes were violent, sudden. Her vitals would crash hard and fast. But the more recent episodes were gentler, slower, more controlled. It was like her body was practicing, learning how to do this properly. Each episode was a rehearsal for the final performance. On day 13, everything changed. I arrived at the hospital at my usual time, around 7 in the morning. Before I even got to the ICU, I could feel something was different. The energy in the hospital felt heavier, quieter. When I walked into Margaret's room, I knew immediately. She was sitting up in bed, but she looked different. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked like someone who was dying. Her skin had that waxy quality. Her eyes were dimmer. Her breathing was labored. She saw me and smiled, but it was a weak smile now. Tired. She said good morning, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said today was the day. I asked her how she knew. She said she could feel it. The pull that had been bringing her back every time, it was gone now. She'd crossed some invisible threshold. Whatever her body had been preparing for, it was ready now. She was ready. I called Rachel, called Margaret's sons. They arrived within 2 hours. They gathered around her bed, said their goodbyes. Real goodbyes this time. Everyone could feel it. This time was different. Margaret was calm, peaceful. She held her daughter's hand, told her children she loved them, told them she was proud of them, told them not to be sad. She'd had a good life, a full life, and she was ready for what came next. Around 11 that morning, Margaret closed her eyes, said she was tired, so tired, she needed to rest now. Her children held her hands. I stood at the foot of the bed, watching the monitors. Her heart rate began to drop. 60, 50, 40, 30. Her blood pressure fell. Her breathing became shallow, irregular. The cardiac monitor showed increasing gaps between beats, longer and longer pauses. And then it stopped. The monitor flatlined with that sustained tone. I looked at the clock. 11:43 a.m. I waited. We all waited, watching her, watching the monitors, waiting for her to come back like she always did. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. The EEG showed no brain activity. No heartbeat, no breathing, no response to any stimulus. At 11:58 a.m., I stepped forward, listened to her chest with my stethoscope, checked her pupils. They were fixed and dilated. I looked at her family, at Rachel, who was still holding her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. I called the time of death, 11:58 a.m. 17 days after she should have died. The family stayed with her for another hour, holding her, saying their final words. I left them alone with their grief. I went back to my office, sat at my desk, signed the death certificate. Cause of death: pancreatic cancer with metastatic disease. Which was true, but it felt incomplete, insufficient to capture what had actually happened. The next day, I attended the internal review meeting. Hospital administration wanted to understand what had happened. Ethics committee was involved, risk management, legal. I presented the facts, the timeline, the documented episodes, the labs and scans and monitoring data. Everything was in the record. Everything was witnessed by multiple staff members. Everything was real. The conclusion, after 3 hours of discussion, was that it was an unusual case, certainly. The human body can do remarkable things. The will to live can sustain people beyond normal medical expectations. Terminal patients sometimes linger longer than predicted. It happens. But that wasn't what I witnessed. Margaret wasn't clinging to life. She wasn't fighting to stay. She was ready to die. Wanted to die. Had accepted her death completely. Her body just wouldn't let her. Not until whatever process it was going through was complete. After the meeting, Patricia Chen found me in the parking lot. We stood there in the cold February afternoon, not saying much. Just two doctors who'd witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. Finally, Patricia asked me what I thought really happened. I told her the truth. I told her I thought Margaret's body forgot how to die. And those 17 days, all those episodes, were her body remembering. Practicing. Preparing. And when it finally remembered how to do it properly, it let her go. Patricia nodded. Then she asked me the question that still haunts me. She asked me what Margaret's body was so afraid of that it kept bringing her back. What was it protecting her from for those 17 days? I didn't have an answer then. I still don't. But I've thought about it every day since. I'm retired now, haven't practiced medicine in years. But I still think about Margaret Sullivan. About those 17 episodes. About watching her die and come back, until finally, on the 17th time, she stayed dead. I've done research since then. Gone through decades of medical literature. Case studies from around the world. And I've found other cases. Rare cases. Patients who should have died but lingered. Who existed in impossible states. Who seemed trapped between life and death. The cases are so rare they're usually dismissed. Attributed to documentation errors or misdiagnosis. But they're there, if you know how to look. And they all share one characteristic. The patient was ready to die. Had accepted death. Had no unfinished business. But their bodies kept fighting. Kept restarting. Kept bringing them back. I've developed a theory. It's not scientific. It can't be proven. But it's the only explanation that makes sense to me. I think death is a skill. Something our bodies know how to do instinctively, like breathing or healing. But sometimes, in very rare cases, something goes wrong. The signal gets crossed. The machinery breaks down. And the body forgets how to complete the process. Margaret's body spent 17 episodes remembering. Each one was a practice run. A rehearsal. And when it finally got it right, when all the pieces aligned properly, she let go. Peacefully. Completely. That's the explanation I choose to believe. But there's another possibility. One that keeps me awake at night. One I've never told anyone until now. What if Margaret's body didn't forget how to die? What if it remembered something else? Something that happens after death? Something that made it fight desperately to keep her here, in this world, for as long as possible? What if her body was trying to protect her from what comes next? I'll never know the answer. Nobody will. All I know is what I witnessed. A woman who died 17 times and came back 16. And on the 17th time, when she finally stayed dead, there was something in her face. Something I've seen before in other faces at the moment of death, but never quite understood until then. It wasn't peace. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like she'd finally remembered something she'd forgotten long ago. Something important. Something final. I don't know what Margaret Sullivan saw in those moments between death and life. I don't know what pulled her back 16 times or what finally let her go on the 17th. But I know this. Death is not as simple as we think. The line between life and death is not as clear as our textbooks suggest. There are places in between. States of being that we don't understand. Processes we can't measure or explain. Margaret Sullivan existed in that in-between place for 17 days. And when she finally crossed over completely, she took whatever she learned with her. I think about her often. Wonder if she's at peace now. Wonder if whatever was waiting for her on the other side was worth the struggle her body put up to delay it. I'll never have those answers. Nobody will. But the questions remain. And they should remain. Because the moment we stop asking questions, the moment we think we understand everything about life and death, that's when we stop being good doctors. That's when we stop seeing the mysteries that exist right in front of us. Margaret Sullivan taught me that. In those 17 days, in that hospital room, she taught me that sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do is admit they don't know. Admit they don't understand, and keep watching anyway. Keep witnessing. Keep documenting. Keep searching for answers, even when you know you might never find them. That's what I did for 37 years. That's what I'm still doing now, in my own way. Telling these stories, sharing these cases, reminding people that medicine is not just science. It's mystery too. It's the place where what we know meets what we don't know. And sometimes, what we don't know is far more important. If you're watching this, if you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want you to know something. Cases like Margaret's are rare. But they're real. They exist in medical records across the world, buried in files, dismissed as anomalies. But they matter. Every impossible case matters. Every unexplainable event matters. Because that's where the next breakthrough comes from. That's where our understanding expands. If you've experienced something similar, something medical science can't explain, you're not alone. If you're a medical professional who's witnessed the impossible, document it. Share it. Don't let it disappear into the noise. And if you're just curious, if you're fascinated by the boundaries of life and death, by the places where medicine ends and mystery begins, then subscribe to this channel. There are more stories, more cases, more impossible moments that challenge everything we think we know. Hit that like button if this story made you think. If it made you question. If it reminded you that there's still so much we don't understand about the human body, about life, about death. Leave a comment below if you have questions. If you've witnessed something similar. If you're a medical professional with your own impossible case. I read every comment. I want to hear your stories too. And if you know someone who would find this interesting, someone who appreciates medical mysteries, share this video. These stories need to be told. These cases need to be remembered. Until next time, this is Dr. Marlowe. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember that the most profound medical discoveries often come from the cases we can't explain. The patients who break all the rules. The moments that remind us how much we still have to learn. Thank you for watching. And remember, death may be inevitable, but it's not always simple. Sometimes it takes practice. Sometimes the body needs to remember. And sometimes, that process is more mysterious than we could ever imagine.